Welcome to the third webinar of the Cisema Webinar Series in 2022 on NMPA registration of medical devices and IVD in China. I'm Hamish.
And I'm Jackie. Today we will present on alternative entry pathways for China marketing approvals.
We're also joined by our esteemed colleague Ning, who's sitting in Beijing, and we'll introduce all ourselves in a short moment. First, just some housekeeping. We're going to talk for around 45 minutes with 10 minutes or so Q&A. We welcome your questions as they arise. Please post them into the chat box, and we'll try to make this as interactive as possible whilst keeping it as informative as we can. The replay link will be available after the session. Please email us for that. If you'd like a copy of the slides, please also get in touch.
First, we would like to introduce Cisema to you. Cisema stands for China Service Management, and we are a regulatory affairs consultant and CRO for China. We were founded in 2002 in Munich, Germany, and Beijing, China, by a former Siemens engineer. We now have 12 offices worldwide with nearly 100 employees, most of those on the ground in China. Please sign up to our monthly newsletter on China certification, which you can do on our website.
I'm Hamish. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Cisema. I'm a lawyer by training, admitted in New South Wales, Australia, and in Hong Kong, which has been my home for the last 7 years. I formerly worked with UK Magic Circle firm Linklaters. I look forward to connecting with those who I don't know from the webinar by email or LinkedIn afterwards. Ning, over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Hamish and Jackie. I'm Guo Ning, and I have joined Cisema since 15 years. I'm working by Cisema Beijing as a general manager to lead our expert teams in different fields. One of our focus is medical device, of course. Back to you.
So I've been working for Cisema since 2019. I've studied my bachelor's in Canada and previously worked in Veritas that specialized in testing, inspection, and certification. Now I am the Cisema lead to support the Hong Kong and China regulatory affairs for customers from Taiwan and Hong Kong.
So a quick overview about what we covered in the previous sessions. In part one, the topic was new clinical evaluation report requirements for China registrations, when we looked at the regulatory framework, the relevant decision pathways and decision trees. We also talked about NMPA requirements for clinical trial, as well as some comparisons of clinical trial and CER guidance across different jurisdictions. In part two, we looked at the clinical pathways and most especially the latest updates, such as the classification, latest updates, NMPA reporting on registrations and standards, China GCP, the NMPA legal agent updates, sampling, digital health, and so on. If you'd like to view these, please send an email. We'll provide you with the link.
So today we will talk about alternative entry pathways to China, including Order 739 and its effects on China registration, fast-track pathways with NMPA itself, Hainan Pilot Zone, and Hong Kong listing through the Greater Bay Area sales. In the final webinar of the year, we will dive into more detail about post-market surveillance, PMS, and also quality management system, and relevant requirements and updates.
A reminder about the base case, by which I mean what the typical registration timeline in our experience looks like for Class 2 and 3 medical devices and IVDs in China. That timeline is roughly 18 months for Class 2 and 21 months for Class 3, excluding clinical trials. If clinical trials are needed, of course, that's going to add maybe a year or more to the timeline. You recall also that local China clinical trials are mandatory for Class 2 and 3 products, unless the product falls under a number of exemptions or other pathways. First of all, you would check if your product is specifically exempt from clinical trials or clinical evaluation, or your product already has clinical trial data of sufficient scope outside of China, so-called overseas clinical trial data pathway, or you have sufficient predicate device data to support the drafting of a clinical evaluation report. And these the marks on the slide really focus on the key bottlenecks and the key timeline and uncertainties that we're going to look at for this session to see ways we can accelerate the process, either to shorten certain parts of the timeline, reduce the review phase, or start or sell without actually having first received your home country approval, and so on.
First, we would like to remind listeners about China's new top-level law for supervision and administration of medical devices. As we discussed in detail in part 2 of our webinar series, this new law came into effect on June 1st of 2021. As you will recall, the hierarchy of laws in the PRC is laws, regulations, standards, then guidelines. This new law is also known as Order 739 because it is the 739th order passed by China's top-level body, the State Council, and replaces the existing Order 680, which dated from 2017. A short timeline of the previous top-level laws is also set out on the slide. Whilst Order 739 is now in effect, the direct impact is still being worked through. This is because the practical effect of the new law will only be clarified with various subsidiary regulations which are being implemented.
Yeah, and quite a lot have been implemented in the last year or so, but there is still more to come. And if you'd like some more detail about particular implementation regulations, then please get in touch, although we won't talk about those specifically in this webinar further. What we will talk about, however, from Order 739 is the specific implementation points that relate to fast-track pathways or acceleration of approvals. And it's important in the context of understanding these alternative entry pathways because it streamlines some of the registration processes and reinforces accelerated approval options. So the first point is around self-testing. It enshrines possibility of self-testing in addition to qualified third-party test reports, albeit the devil is in the detail here, and in our view at this stage, self-testing is not really a possibility for imported devices at this stage, or IVD for that matter. The next point relates to implied approvals, especially for clinical trials. This is a welcome change rather than your clinical trial approval getting caught up in a long approval timeline. There's now a default approval unless the NMPA comes back and says otherwise. Also, we welcome the clinical evaluation, increased flexibility of NMPA in reviewing and accepting clinical evaluation for various products as part of the approval process. There are additional exemptions for clinical evaluation and trials as part of Order 739 and subsidiary regulation, which are still being worked through, and so that's also a welcome change, recognizing that many of these products are not high-risk devices and are familiar to the regulator and other and already well sold globally and understood. Conditional approval is also an interesting new point, which will be familiar elsewhere, but is relatively new in China. I'll say a little bit more about that, as well as innovation approval. Innovation is strongly emphasized in the Order 739, and there have been some important points here that can accelerate your time to market, and therefore, of course, decrease cost and bring revenue sooner. And we're going to talk more about that innovation approval, particularly as well. One other point, just before we move on, is lab-developed tests, LDTs, in relation to IVDs. However, although implemented from a broad top-down policy perspective in Order 739, the detail is still lacking. So this, for IVD manufacturers, this is still a point that needs to be worked through. Ideally, though, IVDs that do not have predicates approved in China can, for qualified medical institutions who develop their own clinical needs, use these IVDs within the institutions under the guidance of practicing physicians.
So in the slide, here are the formal NMPA fast track processes: emergency approval, priority review, and innovation approval. We have also mentioned conditional approval, which is sometimes discussed separately and has been specifically addressed in Order 739. These have been established by the NMPA to deal with unmet medical needs in China and encourage innovation. Order 739 had a particular emphasis on innovation and envisioned faster processes for it. Regarding the registration process of fast-track approvals, applications will be allocated front of queue priority once accepted. The granted front of queue priority affects the classification, preclinical testing, QMS auditing, and CFDA reviewing approving processes. In addition, a specially assigned NMPA officer would check in and provide guidance throughout the expedited process.
Yeah, and just to add here, Order 47 and Order 48 are the relevant orders relating to registration and filing of medical devices. These are supporting regulations to Order 739, and they include new chapters for special registration procedures for emergency approval, innovation approval, and priority review. The rationale, of course, is to ideally encourage innovation and deal with unmet clinical needs in a quicker timeframe. So we'll start with innovation approval. It is intended to encourage technological advances and research and development, providing faster routes to market for specially designated devices and IVDs. As we've said, it receives special emphasis in Order 739. Early priority review with dedicated reviewer and guidance. In particular, a really important point, there's no need for home country or country of origin approval before applying for innovation approval now. And we've had a number of customers recently who've been seeking to make such applications and have helped a number of others because they're developing their products in parallel globally, undertaking such trials or other testing in Europe and seeking to also do so in parallel. So rather than China now being behind the pecking order for your global marketing plan, it can now be implemented together with other jurisdictions for innovative devices, which is quite exciting. The Order 739 also envisions that there is additional support with technology, funding, financing, procurement, and reimbursement, as well as things like special awards for institutions and individuals who have deemed to have outstanding contribution to innovation. Just all this builds up the picture that innovation is strongly emphasized from a top-down policy perspective. What are the requirements? The working principle of the product is the first in China. Performance and product safety is comparingly better than similar products already on the market, and it has internationally leading technology with significant clinical application. Also importantly, there needs to be a China patent and complete studies on the prototype with traceable data. If such products are highly needed for clinical use and considered leading technology products, although this doesn't mean necessarily completely unique products, the average review and approval time can be shortened by a number of months. The experience so far is that this application is, however, not straightforward. We've set out on the slide here some stats. For example, from 2014 to June of this year, 161 medical devices were granted innovative status. That doesn't necessarily mean approval, by the way, but innovative status, and 8 of those were non-Chinese companies. There has, however, been an acceleration in the last year. Since Order 739 was implemented, 60 of those 160 received the innovation approval, with 4 from non-Chinese companies. So that shows that the trend has certainly accelerated. We've also just pictured on the slide here 4 of the imported devices approved. Novocure's tumor electric field therapy instrument, Edward Life Sciences transcatheter aortic valve system, Abbott Vascular's transcatheter mitral valve clamp and maneuverable guide tube device, and the Medtronic's transcatheter implantable leadless pacing system. Just a few top tips for innovation approval. The applicant can initiate the innovation approval at the same time when applying for your China patent, because the China patent is, as you may be aware, is an important process and step, which is not necessarily straightforward. We won't be able to cover patents in this session, but the application does not necessarily have to be made after getting the patent. Another tip is that having been granted the status does not mean approval of the product for marketing, but with front of queue priority, you still need to go through the normal review process.
Moving on, the priority review procedure was implemented in 2017 for introducing medical devices that could offer treatment for specific types of diseases or medical devices that are listed in major or special science and technology or R&D projects of the China government. If one of the requirements are met, the product will be eligible to apply for priority review. For instance, the product should be urgently needed for clinical use while no effective diagnosis or treatment exists in China, or able to demonstrate obvious clinical advantages during the diagnosis or treatment of rare diseases, geriatric diseases, or pediatric diseases. If the priority review device designation is granted, the device will be allocated front of queue priority throughout the registration process. The granted priority affects the classification determination, preclinical testing, QMS auditing, and NMPA reviewing approving processes. And you'll be allocated a specific NMPA officer who will check in and provide the guidance throughout the whole expedited process. This means total approval time can be reduced by a number of months. We've listed out the number of applications accepted and approved announced by the NMPA throughout 2017 to 2021. Although the number of applications is comparatively less than the innovation approval, there are 5 overseas applicants among the total of 11 applications accepted in 2021, which includes Shockwave Medical, Cook Ireland, Boston Scientific, Baxalta US, and Electra. The downward trend is probably because of the other pathways that have been implemented in the last year or two.
So in order to meet any sudden urgent demands of overseas medical products, the emergency approval pathway was first implemented nearly 15 years ago, and again played a very significant role in the outbreak of the coronavirus situation in 2020. The prerequisites to apply include that the products are intended for a public health crisis where there are no similar products on the market or unmet medical needs. Products that are similar to others in the market already may still be granted emergency approval if it's deemed as insufficient supply or to meet certain medical needs. We've sent out here a link to the currently approved list on the NMPA website, and you'll see that many of the approved products are mostly COVID test kits or related testing software, which are classified as SAMD, or other relevant coronavirus testing or therapeutic applications. Emergency approval rapidly accelerates approval times, with registrations received in as soon as 5 days, and the registration tests will be carried out within 24 hours after receiving the samples. A recent guideline specifies that emergency registration approvals have a particular timeline of validity. And now it's maybe a good time for Ning. Ning, if you're there, to just tell us a little bit more about this recent update.
Thank you, Hamish. So we are talking about the emergency approval and the flow diagram, right?
Yes.
Okay, let me introduce process here. And when you want to apply for the emergency approval, You need to prepare the application dossier according to NMPA requirements, and then submit it to the NMPA, and the NMPA will review it in 5 days for class 1, 5 days for class 2, and 5 plus 3 days for class 2, and 10 plus 3 days for class 3 in very short time, and then they will accept it or reject it, and hopefully they will accept it, and then after that you will get registration approval, which is only valid for 1 year, and within this 1 year you can export your products to China and sell these products according to this certificate, based on this certificate of emergency approval in China normally. And there's also application renewal necessary within this 1 year validity. And you need to apply your renewal application in 1 year after the approval has been granted. And then if you have submitted the renewal application successfully, you will get a renewal approval, which is then 5 years valid, which equal to a normal registration certificate. So this is approximately the complete process. Amish?
Thank you. Jackie,
Yes.
conditional.
So for conditional approval, it applies for urgently needed medical devices. NMPA issues the guideline on conditional approval for medical devices back in December 2019. It specifies that devices and IVDs indicating for life-threatening illnesses can be granted conditional approval if the benefits of the products outweigh the risk and the manufacturers are committed to do the further clinical research. The collected pre-market data should be able to prove the efficacy claim of the medical device while providing a reasonable prediction or judgment of its clinical value, in order for the medical device to apply for conditional approval. Once the product is registered and sold in the market, however, and it is discovered that the risk of the product is greater than its benefit, or the registrant can no longer provide adequate proof of the product's safety or effectiveness, the applicant is responsible to apply for cancellation of the registration certificate.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about Hainan a little bit more, and Ning is going to help us with a couple of these slides as well. Ning has actually been holidaying recently in Hainan and had a chance to be there. Hainan is in fact China's Hawaii equivalent. It's an island on the south of China, and the intention is to cater for wealthy Chinese who might otherwise go abroad for their medical care. Chinese government has encouraged a medical tourism zone to benefit from having medical treatment in a top holiday region. This was approved way back in 2013, and it's a 20 kilometer square area, which has had a number of hospitals built and continue to be built, and we'll provide that list shortly. Once a product is approved for use within the zone, the product can, with the consent of Hainan NMPA and the NMPA, collect real-world data, which then be used to supplement your NMPA application. Hospitals are closely involved in the process, as we'll talk about shortly, and there are two broad focus areas with respect to such applications: urgently needed for clinical use, and no products of the same variety in China. The approval relies on home country approval, however. Ning, is there anything you'd like to say about Hainan? What's Hainan? What's Hainan like to visit recently?
Hainan is a beautiful island, and the most beautiful sea resort in China. So I recommend everyone to go there to have your holiday. Thank
you. And the hospitals here, Ning, could you please take us through the recent hospital list?
This is a recent list that we have downloaded from the official website from Hainan NMPA. As you can see, there are in total 15 hospitals have been officially approved for this for this process to import non-certified medical device and pharmaceutical products into Hainan for use. And as you can see, there are some general hospitals like Enhanced International Medical Center, our super hospital, and so on. And there are also some specialized hospitals like the stem cells, like anti-aging hospital and aesthetic hospital, asthma aesthetic hospital, and also Lecheng Eye Hospital, and so on. And if you want the complete list, you can contact us.
Yeah, and here's the application process. Ning, could you take us through a little bit more detail, please?
Yeah, of course. So this is a complete process from the start of Hainan application to the end of the final approval for complete China. So therefore, it seems a little bit complicated because every manufacturer, every foreign manufacturer who wants to go to Hainan to start the process, this is not the final target. Hainan is not the final target. The final target is use Hainan as a springboard, so to say, for them to the mainland China, to be able to get the final approval and to sell their devices not only in Hainan but also in complete China. So firstly, you need to find interested hospitals in Hainan Pilot Zone. These one hospital under these 15 approved hospitals must be interested in your product, in importing and using your product. So you need to find it. And how can you find it? You can contact them one by one to find out if there is a department for your device. And on the other way, you can also contact the doctors or the key opinion leaders you know in your country, in your original country, and then they must know somebody here in China, some doctors here in China or KOL in China, and then these KOLs in China, especially in the metropole cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou and Shenzhen, normally they know the doctors in Hainan, or they themselves will travel to Hainan, fly to Hainan to do these operations. So this is also a good way to introduce your device into Hainan. And then you support the hospitals to submit the application to HHC and Hainan NMPA. HHC is a Hainan Health Commission, and the HHC will do a short urgent need assessment in 1 week, and then they will forward this case to Hainan NMPA for technical review. And Hainan NMPA will finish the technical review within 1 month normally, and then you get NMPA, Hainan NMPA approval to import your device to Hainan special zone. Then you can import your device and put it into clinical use and collect the data. And on the other side, after you get the Hainan NMPA approval, you should also prepare for the application for real-world data. And this application should be submitted to the NMPA Real-World Data Research Center, which has been established by NMPA in Hainan in 2019. And so with this application, you should, before this application of RWD, real-world data, you should, one most important thing is that you should develop a professional real-world data protocol design, and you should submit this protocol to the research center, NMPA Real-World Data Research Center. And after that, you will get a real-world data approval, which will be then guiding you how to collect your real-world data in Hainan, and establish your real-world study and the real-world evidence at last for your final application dossier for NMPA. And on the last line, you can see we start a parallel process, parallel NMPA registration process. You should also prepare this registration process if you want to spring from Hainan to mainland. And the first step is always write the product technical requirement, PTR, and then you also need to do the test. The test cannot be skipped, even if you start from Hainan. And then you will get the test reports and all the other application documents, including technical validation documents and so on. And as you can see, finally, you will get complete application dossier, including the real-world evidence you have collected and established through Hainan, and all the other test reports and application documents you have prepared for the final application dossier in parallel. And then you submit this dossier to NMPA for the technical review, and at last, hopefully, you will get the final approval for China. So this is a complete process for Hainan and the China mainland from the start to the final.
Thank you, Ning. And attendees may wonder, if they don't have experience already with the China process, why would you go through such a process? And the reason is because this allows you to otherwise reduce your local China clinical trial requirements, because it may be a product that requires a clinical trial in China, but hasn't needed a clinical trial elsewhere in the world for your other marketing approvals. Or it may be just that it's a high-risk device and it's very hard to obtain relevant data without doing a China clinical trial. This allows you to have a so-called stage entry into China. It allows you to start marketing the product in China and having KOLs test out the product and the device in hospitals in the Hainan Pilot Zone, and also patients to come and use the device from all around China in the Hainan Pilot Zone. So that's why you might consider going through this additional process.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add briefly with this slide about distinguishing between real-world data, studies, and evidence, which Ning has neatly encapsulated in the previous slide in a practical example of how they work. These are set out in a technical guideline issued in November 2020. So you can see that all this initiative is relatively new in China for the Hainan Pilot Zone, and the number of approvals continue to increase. However, it's worthwhile mentioning that from a practical perspective, the Hainan Pilot Zone is quite small, and so for follow-up, clinical trial or real-world study follow-up, if there's a 3, 6 month, 9 month, 12-month follow-up, this can be difficult when the patients come from around China to the pilot zone and then return back to home country. And we've been speaking with customers about this recently. And yeah, Ning, maybe would you like to mention something further about the follow-up practical difficulties?
Yeah, you mentioned the correct point, and sometimes it's difficult because patients coming from all over China, and also the doctors coming from all over China, and because there are only 15 hospitals, and most of them are newly established in Hainan Special Zone, and there are not so many experienced doctors and surgeons there in Hainan. Therefore, they need to ask the key opinion leaders in the mainland, especially in Beijing, Shanghai, to support them to develop their medical tourist zone. Therefore, many doctors coming from mainland, and therefore even the doctors coming from the mainland, the patients coming from the mainland. So if the follow-up period is long for your device, then it could be difficult to manage. It's different than the clinical trial in China.
Thank you, Ning. So now we're going to move to talk on about Hong Kong pathway, which is another alternative pathway. Jackie's going to lead us here.
So it's now we will dive into another interesting and perhaps more exciting alternative entry pathway to China, listing via Hong Kong to the Greater Bay Area for sales. This has had a lot of momentum in recent announcements.
Yeah, we're going to spend some time going into this because it may be less familiar to the audience. And also, we're sitting here in Hong Kong, so we see it day to day.
So from November 2019, the Hong Kong government issued a press release welcoming the 16 policy measures. It was introduced by the central government of China. Among the 16 measures, the 7th measure was closely related to the future of China's healthcare and medical device industry for permitting the use of Hong Kong registered drugs and common medical devices in the designated Hong Kong-owned healthcare institutions in the Greater Bay Area. The announcement about this GBA integration also referred to medical device sales. That indicates that manufacturers can consider the voluntary listing in Hong Kong as a crucial entrance point to an important part of China as a precursor to China-wide registration with the NMPA. The implementation process of the policy has steadily moved forward since then.
Yeah, and we've just set out here on the slide a few of the key points and some time showing that the momentum over time, as well as the number of recent approvals, which is quite exciting. In particular, 20 drugs and 13 medical devices as of September have been approved for sales within the Greater Bay Area. We're going to talk about the size of the Greater Bay Area in a second, even though they're not approved by China and NMPA. So they have home country approval, they have a Hong Kong listing, they're sold in Hong Kong, and we're going to tell you more about Hong Kong listing as well, but not China and NMPA approval.
So to give you some context about the market opportunity, here's some data. As of today, there are already more than 4,400 medical devices actively listed in Hong Kong. The number of applications for Hong Kong listing continues to increase due to the Greater Bay Area developments. With the implementation of the use of Hong Kong listed medical devices, it will not only greatly impact the Greater Bay Area, but also the China's healthcare and medical device industry, as it encourages innovation and further development. Therefore, we encourage our customers to list their products voluntarily with the MDAX now to ensure that they are not caught up in the rush once the registration is mandatory in Hong Kong.
Yeah, and there's some interesting news about that as well.
So in this slide, we also compare the population size to countries in Europe that indicates the market potential. The Hong Kong population is a little bit less than Switzerland's population, for example, but the population in the Greater Bay Area already exceeds the whole population of the UK. In addition to the China government outlined development plan to improve the Greater Bay Area's quality of medical and healthcare services, the Hong Kong government has also taken a number of steps to support the Greater Bay Area development.
So this is what the approval process, marketing approval process to China looks like. Actually, it's relatively similar to the Hainan process that Ning mentioned earlier. It starts, however, with a Hong Kong listing, and we're going to talk about what that means, although it's a relatively straightforward document-based process, which is actually voluntary in the first place because you don't need to list your product to sell your product in Hong Kong. Then you would need to find a relevant GBA hospital which would like to use and buy your device. With the hospital support, or rather you as a manufacturer supporting the hospital, the application will then be made to the relevant municipal or provincial NMPA, who will then approve the application. In parallel, you'd seek your real-world study, real-world data collection protocol with the NMPA Center, real-world data center, and also you'd be moving forward with your China application as well. And how those move will depend on the time that you want to spend, and the money you want to spend. Obviously, if you stage out the process, you'll be able to capture revenues without incurring the earlier cost and get an idea about product market fit in China for your device or IVD. Otherwise, if you know already, you can move forward all through in parallel and get approval quicker.
Here is an overview of the current organization structure of the Hong Kong government's Food and Health Bureau. The Medical Device Control Office was established in 2004 as a division under the Department of Health. In the same year, they launched the MDAX, the Medical Device Administrative Control System. It's a voluntary listing system for medical devices under which manufacturers and importers could list their medium to high risk medical devices and IVDs with the Department of Health. So in 2019, the MDCO renamed themselves as MDD, which stands for the Medical Device Division, and they are still responsible for the MDAX and the development of a long-term statutory regulatory framework for medical devices. So both the Department of Health and the Hospital Authority are responsible to report to the Food and Health Bureau in Hong Kong. The Hospital Authority is a statutory body managing all the government hospitals and institutes in Hong Kong. The reason why we mention this is because they are responsible for purchasing medical devices for Hong Kong public hospitals. Medical devices commonly used in Hong Kong hospitals would be a great factor for meeting one of the requirements to enter the Greater Bay Area. The most commonly asked question is when the legislative control over the importation and sale of medical device will be implemented in Hong Kong. So if you refer to the right-hand side of the table in the slide, the last seen updates were in 2018 with the proposed regulatory framework for medical devices yet to be finalized and have been pending ever since. According to our regulatory affairs team who are closely in touch with the MDD for listing projects, they also advise that there are no instructions about this change so far. So the answer is there is no definite date for implementation for mandatory medical device approvals in Hong Kong. This table also compares the mentioned mandatory registration of medical devices expected to come in future against the current regulatory control for medical devices in Hong Kong. We suggest manufacturers that are interested to enter the Hong Kong market to have their medical devices listed, the sooner the better, because the voluntary registration process can alleviate some of the expected rush of applications when the process becomes mandatory. The final version of the medical device bill and the latest proposed version may not exactly be the same, but we expect that the framework will be more similar to China's current regulatory regime. We expect some changes in the terminologies used, for instance, from listing to registration and local responsible person to authorized representative, as seen in this table. Medical devices and IVDs in Hong Kong are separately grouped into 4 classes according to risk level associated with their intended use. Class 4 medical devices and Class D IVDs, they bear the highest risk, whereas Class 1 medical devices and Class A IVDs, they bear the lowest. On the Hong Kong Medical Device Division website, there's a free online tool that allows website visitors to check the likely risk class of their product in Hong Kong. But of course, the final decision will be up to the Hong Kong Medical Device Division when they receive and review the application closely. However, applicants may find this tool useful before the application because only medium to high risk medical devices and IVDs can be listed on the Hong Kong MDAX system, which means that Class 1 medical devices and Class A IVDs, they won't be able to apply for listing. The current MDAX system in Hong Kong is based on the principles of medical devices classification proposed by the IMDRF, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. One interesting fact to mention is that the China regulatory body, NMPA itself, was once the management committee members, which shows a growing global leadership and maturity of the Chinese regulator and the Chinese medical device industry. Further on set out on the slide is a simple overview of the application process for listing medical devices in Hong Kong. Applications, they require at least 22 weeks of processing time. If the manufacturer wishes to apply for inclusion of a device into the list of medical devices, but does not have a registered place of business in Hong Kong, the company must designate a local responsible person that must have a valid Hong Kong business registration certificate. Therefore, similar to many global regulatory systems, including the NMPA, CE mark in Europe, and US FDA approval, a local presence is required. In Hong Kong, only the medium to high-risk medical devices and IVDs can be listed as mentioned. So the successful device applications will receive a listing number and be listed in the MDAX online database. The listing will be valid for 5 years. As of today, there is no application fee for listing medical devices on the MDAX system. However, foreign manufacturers should expect the cost for appointing a local responsible person in Hong Kong. This is something that we do at Cisema for our customers regularly.
Yeah, and here we go into a bit more detail because we're running short on time, which you can read at your leisure on the slides. But it is worthwhile mentioning a few practical tips, Jackie, to attendees.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So one tip that we can share from common problems that we've experienced with our clients is that the Hong Kong Medical Device Division, they can be quite strict with the contact information details stated on the documents, such as the manufacturer's address. So certificates like the ISO 13485 and other foreign market approval certificates will have their address printed on it. This may not always be up to date, so the manufacturer it could be because the manufacturer is relocated to a different address, but they're still waiting for the certificate issuing body to provide the certificate with the updated information. The applicant must ensure all the required documents for dossier submission are up to date. Otherwise, additional processing time may incur.
Yeah, and that's because this listing relies on your home country approvals, CE mark or US FDA or Japan PMDA. Here's a brief overview of the timeline. It's around a 5 to 6 month process, document based. The collection process itself is a couple of weeks, followed by a 2-month review process and confirmation of completeness and correctness before there's a secondary, more detailed review, which takes a number of months, as well as a board meeting to grant approval and listing on the MDAX database.
According to the specific prerequisites to apply for JBA approval, the product scope covers medical devices urgently needed for clinical use. The intended use must be clearly defined by the designated medical institutions in the Greater Bay Area during the application process. The medical devices must also be procured and already operating in the public hospitals in Hong Kong or Macau, which is why we stressed the importance of Hong Kong listing in our previous slides. Last but not least, the medical device itself must be considered as possessing advanced technology in its clinical application. Once the dossier submission is considered as complete, the Guangdong NMPA will first take 5 working days to form a special task force to work with the Guangdong Health Commission, which will take 15 additional working days to carry out the application review. The Guangdong Health Commission will then provide comments to the Guangdong NMPA. After receiving the comments, the Guangdong NMPA will take 50 more working days to decide and announce the results of the application. Therefore, the application process will take at least 35 working days in total after the dossier submission is completed, which is a lot faster than the usual NMPA registration process. Unless applications are yet to go through the application process for Hong Kong listing, then it will take a little bit more time. Once the product is approved for importing into the Greater Bay Area, the registration will be valid for a year. If any product recalls or adverse events were to occur, the designated medical institutions hold the responsibility to make arrangements and report to the local NPA. In addition to the Hong Kong University Shenzhen Hospital, the Guangdong NMPA held a press conference introducing 4 new designated medical institutions in August 2021. In this slide, we also include the first medical equipment introduced by the Hong Kong Shenzhen Hospital that obtained the GBA approval. It is a magnetically controlled rolling titanium rod for treating scoliosis.
Yeah, and it was the manufacturer is an international manufacturer who's a member of of an association who we presented to recently. So it's interesting to see that the number of approvals continues to accelerate, especially for these more innovative and urgently needed medical devices. So that wraps up our presentation for today. And here's a broad summary in a nice arrow-like form to show what we've been talking about. We started with the broad fast-track channel pathways: innovation, approval, priority review, emergency approval, conditional approval. Then we talked also about NMPA Order 739 and the ways that facilitates and helps accelerate approval processes before talking about Hainan and Hong Kong listing into Greater Bay Area. Okay, a final reminder about the part 4 in our series, which will be on December the 1st. So please mark your diaries. Okay, well, we're nearly at time here, so I think we'll wrap up there. And if you have any other questions or comments, then please get in touch. Thanks very much for your time and have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.